Alrighty, hello, welcome everyone. And we are going to get started in just a minute, just here. Okay, already welcome. So today we're going to be talking about growing roses organically. Stu Dalton will be our speaker today, and I'm here with Lyngso, and this is one of our regular talks. So for those of you who are just joining us, welcome, and type in your questions via chat and we'll go ahead and address them towards the end of the talk. So without further ado, Stu, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Can. And thanks to Lyngso for putting this together. I've been impressed with the recordings that you have on your site and used a lot of Lyngso products over the years that I've been in the area. I am not associated with Lyngso. I am a master gardener with the UC Cooperative Extension Master Gardeners of San Mateo and San Francisco counties. And I'm also a longtime member of the Peninsula Rose Society and American Rose Society, and I'm a master rosarian. All that really means is I've been doing this a long time. I've started in roses on my first home, but even before that, my dad said, oh, we're gonna go help prune the neighbor's roses across the street when I was 10. He meant we, as in you get to learn. And ever since I've been growing in different times, and most recently I've been trying to move everything as much as possible in my entire yard to organics and growing organically. I have 250 roses in my Menlo Park, San Francisco Bay Area home in Zone 9B, which is a pretty nice zone to grow almost anything. In back of me in the picture here, you see a few things, including some nice lantana that attracts tons of pollinators, some lavender, and some roses. Roses that have been grown pretty much organically. This happens to be a very nice floribunda, and bees tend to love the wide open rose blossoms, sort of like apple blossoms. They're related, actually. And I want to protect them and all the other pollinators. The learning objectives for today include, I'm going to talk about safety and tools. I want to emphasize you don't have to spray everything, you don't have to fertilize everything to get better roses, but you do want to try and reduce the issues. So one thing you can do is prune. I'll talk about that. To make sure you reduce fungal diseases and things, water early in the day. And then it dries out and you get fewer fungal diseases. There are other things you can do as well. I'll talk about amending with fertilizers and organics. I'll talk about identifying and managing the insects and disease issues. And I'll talk about water and maybe the lack of it and what you can do to deal with it, even for roses. And it also helps on weeds. And that really boils down to things like covering the ground and mulch. Equipment. I can give you a graphic example if I showed you a picture of one of my friends in the Rose Society. She had a big black and blue mark above her eye, and a rose thorn had whipped up when she was leaning down and got her just above the eye. Thank goodness it wasn't in it. That hat over to the side has a brim on it. I've been hit in the head before as well. The goggles, either that or if you wear glasses, that's fine, are two important pieces of safety equipment. Getting good shears is important. Making sure they're sharp is important. And most important is protect yourself with heavy old clothes when you're out in the garden. Gauntlet gloves, these are gauntlets that protect your upper arm, as well as the hat and glasses or goggles. You want to sharpen the tools. I like to test it by cutting paper. Fold over a piece of paper, and if you cut through that paper, double thickness, it's probably sharp enough. It's better to have a sharp blade, both for the rose and for your hands, because you protect yourself. One of the things that is free and can really reduce disease and actually insects, because you can find them easily, is to prune out for air and light. When I learned pruning of fruit trees long ago, I was raised on an apple farm, the disease is reduced by having air and light in the middle. In that kind of pruning, you call it a sun cut, trying to get sun into the middle of the plant. You cut out the canes that are growing to the center of the bush. It isn't this dramatic as this cartoon shows. It's not quite that open in the middle, but basically like a vase shape. Right now, you probably got a whole bunch of new growth in our area anyway, on your roses, and you've got things growing into the middle. Take your gloved hand, run it down in the middle and knock out some of that tender new growth in the middle, or a little later on, cut out some of those middle canes that are crossing and keeping the air and light out. By doing that, you reduce fungal diseases. You can also reduce splashing water, which might knock up spores that have been there. So you had rust the last year or fungal disease, and that was on the ground and you didn't get everything cleaned up. If you bring up the leaf cover for a couple of inches, or maybe 8 to 12 even on a larger bush, it keeps that splash up of spores from happening and getting so much infection. So that's all free. At this point in the year, you probably are starting to see either new growth, or some of the old roses might actually have a bloom or two. Mine does. And if you didn't prune, you're doing perfectly if it's a once blooming rose. Some of the old roses are like that. There are Lady Banks roses that are either white or yellow, they're all over, and they start blooming early. But they bloom on old wood. So don't prune these for air and light or anything else until the spring flowers are done. If you already did, don't worry about it, they'll come back. But you do remove dead, damaged, and disease growth almost all the time if you see it. Another thing you can do that's free and irritating, frankly, is to remove suckers. A sucker is something that comes from the roots and basically takes all the energy out of the roots to grow. And it can weaken or even kill the desired rose. If you see in this rose photograph above, this is actually of the San Jose Rose Garden, where they know how to grow roses. And if you look carefully, you can see some lighter pink over on this side. That's the inside of the fence. And all this red over here on the outside, that's all a sucker. Probably a rose called Dr. Huey, and it's used a lot for rootstock, and they graft on the part you want. So that's where it's budded. There's a knob, and I literally dug this out of my garden this year, and the mass down at the bottom here. Let's see, get my cursor back. Well, the part at the bottom is of that is a root mass, and then off to the right of that picture on the bottom, it says dead. That was the original rose. All the side on all the side on the other part is green and growing. It's taken over and it's killed the main plant. Here's one with a tree rose, or a standard as it's really called. This green over here and this green over here are coming from the roots on this standard. And they're going to take out the energy. So cut it off, remove it as completely as possible. The best way is to grab it down at the base, work it back and forth if you can. And if you can't, try cutting it back as far as you can to the roots. Now we'll talk about fertilizers and nutrition a bit. There are lots of things you can do. Almost everything in this photograph, other than my gloves and the table and such, are organics, with one exception, which is a mix, and it's slow release. So what I say here at the top is if you use chemical fertilizers, there are some that are relatively slow to release, such as urea. And then there are liquid fertilizers, many of which are organic, some of which are not. But the organics like fish fertilizer, kelp fertilizer, I've got kelp over here, seaweed extract, and they are often applied every 4 to 6 weeks. I like it after every bloom cycle from March through September. You apply it too early, it leaches out before you get growth. You haven't applied it effectively. You apply it after September, and you make the plant grow when it's really trying to go to sleep for the winter. You want it to do that so that it goes semi-dormant. And that's roughly October 1st, I stopped fertilizing. The nice thing about organics is they release slowly. They're not going to burn much. It takes bacteria and microorganisms to break down the organics to free the nutrients into a usable form. One example of that down here in the photograph are alfalfa pellets. Yes, they're the same things that you can feed to sheep and other livestock, and they're cheap, and they're alfalfa, and they have something in it that is a growth stimulant called tricontinol. But organic fertilizers, these are a shelf at Lyngso that I asked Terry Lyngso if I could take a picture of a while back. There are wide varieties. There's things that are balanced. Crab meal is pretty good that way. Cottonseed meal, which is nice, and I used to use it all the time when I was trying to get a little bit of acidification to my soil to get the nutrients to be absorbed. It acidifies the soil a little bit. But there are all sorts of things that are available for true organics. And good compost, and this happens to be a Lyngso compost that I use a lot of. Again, I don't own stock in Lyngso. This is a diesel compost, a turkey compost that's been beautifully composted and amended to make a very rich material. Most everything in the garden loves it. My roses have done very well using this as a supplement. And in fact, I've got rings of it, about a 5 gallon per big plant, put on the top, and then I put mulch over the top of that. Does a great job of providing modest fertilizer value, improves the life and the health of the soil, and adds nutrients and micronutrients. Soil pH, where you get the best absorption of nutrients, not just in roses, in many plants, but particularly in roses, it would love a pH of 6.5. That's just very slightly acidic. I was a chemical engineer in another life. The soil organic mixes, or the organic mixes, vary widely. This is one that you can tell it's been used when I took the picture. And it's one that is certified organic. It does have a lot of nice things, and you can get what they're called the big 3 nutrients: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, NPK. That's on the label right over here. It's on the label of other kinds of things that are chemical fertilizers. That's not horrible. They are usable to the plants, but there's much better things you can use as far as the soil health is concerned. And this has something that really improves the health. They call it probiotics, but what it really is biological enhancements, things like mycorrhizal, endo and ectobacteria that are able to enhance the soil. So some things have a mix. Usually pay a little bit more for that, but it has some really nice materials in it. Things like feather meal, bone meal, blood meal, but also things like alfalfa and chicken feather litter and feather meal, etc. Each mix, you need to look at the side to see what it has. If you get alfalfa pellets, they're cheap and they're available at feed stores typically. There's some in my hand. I put those in the soil in the root zone, and it works pretty well. If you don't have, if you get that, these pellets literally look like that in the bag. And then don't get the ones that have molasses added just because they mold a little more and have sugar that the plant doesn't need. I have switched from peat moss because peat moss is not a renewable, sustainable material to coir. Coir, what is coir? Coir, it's coconut husk fiber. There are a lot of coconuts in the world. Husks get thrown away, or they can get ground up and made into a brick, about 10-pound brick in the bottom of a tray here, or actually it's a storage bin. And then when you wet it, it fills up the whole storage bin. You get 10-pound brick and it makes about 100 pounds of this moist material. I use it for cutting starts, or like today I was transplanting some tomato seedling starts, and it's a marvelous material. It's not just coir. I know you can't read this well from the screen, but it includes things like derived from blood meal, feather meal, bone meal, fermented soybean meal, fermented cottonseed meal, kelp meal, worm casting, soft rock phosphate, and sulfate of potash and ammonia, and has mycorrhizal, and it has active bacteria and some other things, humic acid. Wait a minute, that's the kind of stuff that really gives a lot of nutrition, not just something like peat. And so I've been using this. It works beautifully for cutting starts. I've got a couple hundred rows cutting started this year, and for seedlings, tomatoes, veggies, etc. It's a very nice material. I don't have any stock on this one either, by the way. Be careful with manure, and raw manures particularly. Raw manures have some interesting characteristics, including they can have pathogens. You have to handle them carefully. They also things like raw horse manure can be hot, stinky, and often contain weed seeds, and they can have a lot of salts in them because of what they eat. You have to wait and compost these, and things like steer manure that you can get in the regular big box stores can be cheap. They're blended with wood bark, and it's not a bad material. I've used it. You do have to worry about anything building up salts if it doesn't get enough water. And this year we haven't had a heck of a lot of water. So water leaches out some of the salts. Chicken and litter and manure can burn the roses. Chickens have higher nitrogen content in the raw manure. That's because of the way that chickens eliminate. And the compost, this picture I got this morning, actually, put it in here. This happens to be a mixture of horse manure, chicken manure, grass clippings, weaves. Sorry, I just typed this morning. Leaves and straw. And it is actively composting. If you can read that, it says basically 160 degrees. Now that's hot enough to kill the pathogens. It's hot enough to get most of the weed seeds out, but you do have to turn the compost to make sure you get it high and hot enough to kill the seeds all through the compost. Otherwise, the middle compost is great. The ones on the stuff on the outside may not have gotten hot enough. There are other soil amendments. There are minerals, etc. Recently, I heard some material from Rebecca Coryatim of David Austin. She's one of the U.S. marketing managers in Everett, Washington. And she recommended something that I'm going to try. And I heard really good things about it from some people in my Rose Society, Peninsula Rose Society. So I got a 44-pound bag, and I'm trying it out this year. But as I say, I've heard some good things. It's a mineral deposit, a rock dust from Utah. But it is a little different in that it's a volcanic area. But if you go back in geologic times, there was an inland sea there. And so there's maybe some minerals and such from the ocean as well. And I'm experimenting with it. It has almost no fertilizer value in the sense of the big three, NPK, but it has a lot of micronutrients and such. If you think from a soil test that you need amendment of certain trace elements, you might consider things like this. But I always think, okay, wait a minute, the vineyards like the volcanic materials, maybe it wouldn't be so bad. So I tried it out. You use it with compost, so you need the organics as well. This has no organics in it. So what do you do if you have bugs, or really more accurately, insects or mites? The big thing you can do, and I started doing it a week or so ago, and I've already seen a few of these little critters. They're usually the vanguard of the pests, aphids. Aphids, you don't have to use any pesticides, and I'll show you in a minute one of the things you can do, but basically, there's a lot of information on identifying pests. You can go on, just search for UC pests, roses, and you'll find the kinds of pests that attack roses. These are some of them that I've taken pictures of in my yard. And there are some good control mechanisms for some of these. Aphids, you wash them off. And there's techniques to do that that make it easier on the rows and very easy to get to them. Mites, you wash them off. They come usually a little when it gets hotter and toward the lower part of a plant. Rose curculio, they're a nasty weevil. I call them the evil weevil. You can sort of see a little dot up here. That long proboscis sticks into the rose, sucks the life out, and they lay their eggs in there. The bud dies, it drops off, falls to the ground, you get them the next year. What you do, the first thing is hand pick. But if you try and grab them, they jump. And so I have soapy water in a bucket underneath. As you grab them, they often jump off and fall in the water. That's it. Spittle bugs, they don't do much harm, but they look ugly. They look like a foamy bit of spit that's near the bud usually, or near the new growth. And try to wash them off. Yeah, they can sort of get it. If you have gloves on, you can squish the spittle and squish the bug, and it gets it. Tussock moths. If you have oak trees, you see the oak leaf caterpillar or the tussock moth drops down off the oak tree and eats the thing. There are others. You can get to the UC pest identification note here, or look under Integrated Pest Management. Then there are also beneficial insects you want to encourage. To wash off the aphids and spider mites, I use this contraption. It's very simple. Water wand, yeah, you take off the end and put on a slightly different nozzle, and it's just the right amount of spray to knock off the aphids and the spider mites, get underneath the leaves without having to get on your knees to bend down. And you spray up something that's a local company here in the Bay Area, the Fogit nozzle, which they make different sizes of nozzles, but a 4 GPM really works well, and it has a pretty strong spray. It knocks them off. Aphids don't come back. I don't know if they're dumb or if they get actually their their mouthpiece broken. I've heard both, but they just don't come back. You get probably 90% of them with one spray. Do it a couple of times with a couple of days, interval, and they don't come back. Fungal diseases. These are the big three in our area. Other people may have some different fungal diseases, but these big three are fairly easily recognizable by their characteristics. Especially in cooler, more humid microclimates, fungal diseases are very common. Black spot, when it rains a lot in the Northwest or back east in the summertime, you can often get black spot persisting. But black spot, if left untreated and you have a bunch of it, if you have a lot of rain especially, which we don't right now here, if you get that black spot, it can defoliate the plant and actually cause serious damage. Usually, if you strip some of the leaves and it dries out, like it's doing here now, unfortunately, you don't have much black spot, and it doesn't need too much in the way of spraying. Powdery mildew. In the summer, that is a very, very common material in our area. What causes it? Well, it's a spore, it's a fungus, but the conditions are warm days, cool nights. And I think that is a perfect description of the San Francisco Bay Area as an example, many coastal climates. And you do get mildew. But there's an old home remedy that people have used for a while, and I think University of North Carolina actually looked at originally, which is basically baking soda and a little bit of dish detergent. There's something a little better, though, and UC says it can eradicate the mildew, and it's called, a very funny name, bicarb, old-fashioned fungicide. It's potassium bicarbonate as the active ingredient, but it has a spreader sticker in it. That's what, by the way, dish detergent does. But the pre-made stuff was on the market as bicarb old-fashioned fungicide, but it's hard to find now. Apparently there was a supply issue. But I've used it. It's a pretty good fungicide. And potassium bicarbonate is actually a nutritional supplement you can buy over the counter or on Amazon. Rose rust is all year. More if you don't catch it early. So try and get that air and light in there that we were talking about. But then you can use certain fungicides that are relatively non-toxic. And if you do use anything, well, we'll talk about that in a minute. Remove and dispose of all the badly damaged foliage in the city compost. Don't put it in your own compost pile unless you can get it up to that 160 degrees or 140 degrees that we were talking about. If you do spray, and I, full disclosure, have worked for my uncle's spray business as a teenager. I'm still alive. But we use a lot of different things these days, and you want to use good things, or better things, less toxic things. Follow the directions on anything. Some of the things that are biologically not too bad, if you get them on you, can still harm your eyes, protect yourself, wash up afterwards. Spray early in the day. It is dry, not windy. It will be dry for 24 hours. And get out there really early to avoid the bees and beneficials if you spray during growing season where there are flowers out. Spray oils, there's horticultural oil, spreaders, which cause the surface tension to stick. They're called spreader stickers, and soaps on a day not exceeding 70 F, because you don't want to have it concentrate on the end and cause spray burn. Spray the underside of the leaves as well as the tops. Spray the ground just immediately around the plant, because spores have fallen down with leaves and things. What do you spray with? These are all certified as organics that are in the picture here. And believe it or not, one of the things my dentist recommended, and I use, is that thing down at the bottom. It's neem mouthwash. I'll get to that in just a minute. If you don't wish to spray for fungal disease, as I said before, try pruning for more air and light and increase the ground to foliage height. Overhead watering actually reduces mildew. Most people believe it increases mildew. That's not true. The thing that increases mildew is the warm days, cool nights. If you overhead water in the morning, then it dries out during the day and you don't get, it interrupts the spore production cycle, and it actually can help. Black spot goes away as new growth and on new growth as the season warms, but remove the badly damaged leaves. Use the less toxic spray. That neem mouthwash is not a joke. I first saw it in my dentist's office on the side, and I've been using neem as a spray selectively for years. So it's very useful. Water and mulch. I'm sorry to say we've had so little rain out here. I've been collecting rainwater and even in special things and trying to keep the mosquitoes out, etc. Set timers to water deeply and infrequently. Recent research on sustainability at UC has, University of California has shown that you can have a rose survive if it has very deep roots and you water it very deeply. And they've gotten by in Davis with 1 or 2 waterings per year. but you have to water deeply, and they have to be set up, and you have to water more in the early years to get the roots down deep. And you have to mulch. 5 gallons per week per large plant is usually sufficient in summer. There are ways you can measure drippers and things of that sort. I have something like 600 drippers and 26 irrigation circuits in my rather large yard for my 250 roses and other plants and other veggies, etc. And I have different amounts and different schedules depending on what it is. Mulch. What you're seeing here is a picture of arbor mulch, rather large mulch, maybe not the most attractive, but it has some advantages. And that's what I use. If you put a deep layer of mulch and then replenish it periodically, and you don't have to remove it, that does a lot of things for you, including reduces transpiration and evaporation from the soil, improves the soil tilth and the structure, and it lets the microorganisms slowly reduce the cellulose. So you don't want to use necessarily plastic or rocks if you want it to slowly become soil over time. You want to keep it away from the rose plant crown or the bud union or the base, whatever you want to call it. You don't want bacterial infection around there. So you reduce just a little area or pull away just a little area around the base. That also helps keep the soil nice and loose. If you see a yard that's been blown, a mow and blow type of gardening, and there wasn't any mulch on it, well, it's nice and clean. Well, and it's also like a brick. It's hard, it's dry, it's light colored, not a lot of carbon, and it really isn't improving the soil to do that. Mulch improves the soil long term, especially if it's a natural material. Roses, we don't suggest leaving the rose leaves. Put those in the city compost. But we do say that you can do a lot with mulch. Also reduces weeds. If they are weeds that come up through it, they tend to be these the long roots that can come right out by pulling easily. Lastly, there are lots of informational things available on My Home Rose Society, which is shown here. It's the peninsulaRoseSociety.org. There's also, I will say, for anybody in our area, there's a open rose show people can exhibit. That's an American Rose Society judge show that'll be done, and we're, thank God, inside this year, and we can have a real rose show. We haven't for the last couple of years. They've been virtual. We typically meet on a Tuesday, and we're starting up with hybrid Zooms coming on the third Tuesday this month, just next week. There are consulting rosarians. I'm one of those. I'm now a master rosarian, which just means I've done it a long time, but they're available at Consulting Rosarians. There are YouTube videos under Peninsula Rose Society YouTube for our channel, and you can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Peninsula Rose Society. And email, there's mine for questions on the presentation. I assume there may be some that we aren't answered today, but come at them later. These are some of the references. I want to, I've used several from the UC, and you can see that there, if you just put UC roses, you'll find these as references. And there's the American Rose Society, rose.org. There's the also a guide to rose diseases and their management. I'd like to acknowledge and thank the Lyngso people for setting this up. Again, I highly recommend several of their past recorded presentations. I went through some of the soils courses with master gardeners, and they did a great job of translating that into a two-piece Lyngso presentation on soils. It's excellent. I also want to thank the UC Master Gardeners of San Mateo and San Francisco counties. We are educated by many of the specialists in the UC system, and we are all volunteers trying to provide information out to the public. I am a Master Rosarian with the American Rose Society and past president of the Peninsula Rose Society. And this year I happen to be the vice president. Except for a couple of photos that did have attribution, those are mine. And one last thing, I know this may go a little further afield than San Mateo or San Francisco counties. So I say, if you have questions, ask a master gardener. Almost every county in the country has master gardener chapters. And our chapter will typically refer you to another one if that's appropriate. But you can email questions to the mouthful here, MG SMSF, that's Master Gardener San Mateo, San Francisco, at UCANR, that's Agricultural Natural Resources.edu, or just call our helpline. It'll go to a recording and you'll get answers for that. We hope to open our locations soon to get the questions answered. Okay, I've got this ugly looking rose leaf. What's wrong? And you used to be able to come in and get that taken care of, or at least looked at. We figure out if we can answer, or they might refer questions. But right now, it's not that way. You have to do it via electronic means. And again, there's our website, and you could also look up Master Gardeners San Mateo or Master Gardeners San Francisco, and you'd find us on the web. You can follow us in a number of places. With that, I'll take questions. These are a couple of roses from my garden. All except the Pink Promise are in my garden. That was at a rose show. And with that, I will go back to this slide and be happy to answer the questions that came in on the chat.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Stu. I've got a few here, so let me go back and okay, so this person's rose plants, several dozens of them. They're about 10 years old, and they have what appears to be a mosaic virus. And they've noticed this all of a sudden last year. So they're wondering how to go about mitigating this.
The good news is it's not fatal. The bad news is it weakens the plant. Mosaic, for those of you that aren't familiar, looks sort of like a lightning bolt in yellow on a nice green leaf. It's a disfiguring sort of thing. There are lots of mosaic viruses, tobacco mosaic virus, and there are several rose versions, but the most common one you'll see is a like lightning or irregular shaped, jagged sort of yellow on the leaves. They tend to come out in the spring and early summer. They tend to go away naturally as a disfigurement of the color later in the year. Unfortunately, there's nothing you can do to get rid of it. Now, how do you get it? It's not by contaminated tools. Some people think it is. You don't spread it to another one. It's spread in the grafting process. So this is always on infected plants that come from the grafting process. UC is trying to give root material to the growers that has been treated to in high temperature special devices to kill the virus. Unfortunately, you can't do it at home. So I've got several. I like some of the plants. They aren't quite as vigorous as some of the other plants, but they survive and they produce roses, maybe not as many. So it's a long answer to the question. Unfortunately, you can't get rid of it. It can be moderated a little bit with time. You can remove the ones that are most impacted, the leaves that are most impacted.
All righty, fantastic. Thank you for that. Next question is, what would be the best NPK ratio for rose fertilizers?
That's actually a good question because it varies depending on the time of the year. Beginning of the year, oh yeah, we want it to start growing. Well, so do the aphids. Aphids love fast, new, bright red growth that happens right about now. And to get faster growth, you add more nitrogen. So N being high, like you do for lawns and things, will cause a lot of growth, but it also causes a lot of aphids. If you just have a balanced ratio, you'll get a few less aphids. The mnemonic to remember what they do is up, down, all around. Up, as in it grows a lot, top growth for nitrogen. Down, roots, and frankly, strong stems and strong blooms. K, everything benefits from potassium. Now, potassium leaches out of the water column very quickly, and so you need continuing amounts of potassium, either from slow degrading compost or potassium adders like kelp or whatever. But phosphorus, the middle one, doesn't move in the water column very easily. So for those types of fertilizers, it's always good to dig it in a little ways so they can get down to the roots. So balanced is probably best. At the beginning of the year, not too much nitrogen. At the end of the year, not too much nitrogen because you don't want it to be growing a lot. Balanced most of the year.
Okay, thank you. Could you add wonder soil to raised beds?
You can. It's an expensive way to do it. I prefer to use good compost like if you're planting a new rows, the old saw is try and get about half amendment to the native soil. You don't want to take out all the native soil, even if it's clay. You want to break it up, add compost and organic materials. If you do a soil analysis, one of the things they almost always say is add organic matter. It's really important. So you can add wonder soil. It's good material, but it's relatively expensive. If you buy bulk compost, which is what I tend to do, that's what I tend to add.
Okay, thank you for that. I think the next question is about the Fogit nozzle. Do you know where folks can get them locally?
They're a local firm. I don't know what supply issues are these days. I haven't tried to buy one in a long time. They last. You can try Fogit. I know Amazon had them. I'm not sure they have the 4 gallon per minute. And I know some of the local hardware stores had them. But I wouldn't recommend any one because I don't know. You might call them first to see if they have the FOGG-IT nozzles.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any pruning tips for California wild rose, the native roses?
You don't have to do much. I've got some near me. There's a native planting half a block away near El Palo Alto, or a block away near El Palo Alto, the tree. And they really don't need much. They make their own litter, that decomposes, that provides some of the fertilizer. If you do fertilize, I'd say just use a little bit of good compost. I wouldn't add much more.
Okay. Any pruning tips for a Dave Austin rose? How many canes should they go down during pruning?
Shrub roses in general, I've got, I think, 15 David Austins. And there is actually a video that made me laugh. The easiest way I know is look at the David Austin video. And it was, you measure it, cut it down halfway, straight across, clean up the dead and crossing dying, and that was it. That's almost an oversimplification. What you want to do is leave a number of good canes and some structure. If you leave it as a shrub, that's a good way to prune it, meaning don't have to over prune it, shape it, cut it back a little bit in the wintertime, typically, for most of the David Austins. There are some that are called ramblers. by the name of that, you might think this rambles all over the place, and that's the idea. So you leave the structure on things that are climbing roses, prune them by training them off to the side and cover over whatever you're trying to cover over. It could be a barn on some of the bigger ones. But things like Gertrude Jekyll, an old one, or another is Graham Thomas, an older David Austin. You prune as large shrubs, cut them back a little bit. You can even use a hedge trimmer on them. Apparently, David Austin in the field uses hedge trimmers, power hedge trimmers.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so this person, before COVID in 2020, their roses were really spectacular. They're wondering, are some years better than others for bloom?
Well, mine were pretty spectacular before. The roses that I had in back of me here were last year. These are two Sally Holmes. There's a Floribunda that was also on my cover page down, let's get down here, and a hybrid tea up here. So that I've got shrubs that are not climbers, but they're big shrubs. I've got other things. And they were all doing really well last year. Now, I let my lawn darn near die. I saved about 30% of my water. I did water them, roses, with drippers deeply last year. And I got this. So I don't know what the culture was. I would say try the compost, try the mulch, water deeply and infrequently. And if you need some more nutrition, you can add things like time-release fertilizer. The one I showed in that picture a ways back. Let's see if I can get. No, I'm not going to try to get to it quickly here. It was called Shake and Feed, which seems more like a regular prill or small bead fertilizer, but it has urea in it, which works slowly. It has more nitrogen in it. If you need more growth, use something like that. But I used mainly alfalfa. I used a lot of it, hundreds of pounds of alfalfa a year, pellets for my hundreds of roses, and see if that gives you a boost.
All righty, so the next one's really just a comment. Maybe you could talk a little bit about this as well, Stu, but I'll just read that to you. So since we're talking about growing roses organically, we need to mention that some native bees, such as leafcutter bees, like rose leaves and will cut circles out of the rose leaves to roll and then lay their eggs, not in the rose. It takes the cut rose leaf away. But if you see rose leaves that have cut circles out of them, the bees are not hurting the rose bushes, and you're helping native bees.
I absolutely agree. I love the beautiful semicircles they cut in the leaves. They're very neat. And people ask, what are those? I usually, if I have any, I'll bring some to my, I'm gonna have a booth at the Spring Garden Market, April 9th, on roses for the master gardeners, where we sell tomato plants. And if I have any, I'll bring some because they're cute. They don't hurt the plant. They don't bother it that much. Don't worry about them. Just enjoy the bees. Native bees are great. I was mentioning today, I saw teddy bear bees. They look like a big bumblebee, but they're russet colored. Or I've seen all sorts of leafcutter bees and other types of pollinators. You don't want to kill them. That's one reason to use the least amount of sprays. And if you do have to spray, do it very surgically on the things that are impacted. Don't just blast the garden. And do it when the bees aren't there.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so this person learned that there was a website that figures out what varieties of rose bushes did great in what areas by entering their zip code, but they can't seem to find it. And they're wondering if by any chance you know anything about that.
I don't know that one. I do know that there are people online, there's information about this one does well in zones 5, 6, and 7 and can take that much cold. My zone, I don't have to usually worry about that so much. But the other thing is there are different conditions. For instance, some roses like hybrid musk varieties, I've got a number of those, and Sally Holmes, which is in back of me here, the white rose, has hybrid muscinus genetics. They can stand a little more shade. I've got some huge sequoias in the wrong place in my yard for my sunny areas. And so they can take a little more shade. So it's not just the climate, it's the microclimate, it's your yard, it's the sun and shade, etc. But I don't have a website. We do have on the Peninsula Rose Society a favorite roses of the Peninsula Rose Society. Those work well. They're not the most recent roses.
All righty. So the next question is about how to tell a young rose whether it's a rambler or not, especially when they're not marked.
Oh, not marked and unknown roses, let it grow for a while. If it's a climber, one thing you don't want to do is prune it. You want to keep the main growth going out to the side, and you want it to go down at the end. So think of my arms being outstretched and down. Can't show it unless I go way back, but that causes something called apical growth up the top, and you get a whole bunch of growth along the whole arm or the whole cane, a branch if you want it. And you can do it up and over, and then a higher one up and over. That's how you do a climber. But if you don't know, try and get it to bloom, try and get it identified. If you can't, we try and help identify it in our in-person. You can send a photograph of it to see if you can get an identification to the Peninsula Rose Society, consult the rosarians. There are a couple of ways to get information. If you send it to the master gardeners and they have a problem, they'll probably send it to me anyway. So I'm the resource for that.
Okay, so this one is it's interesting. Scott's Super Bloom, water soluble plant food. 12, 55, 6 are the numbers. Are those numbers crazy? What do you think?
Let me give you an analogy. What happens when you drink sugar? You get a rush, and that is strong. Well, now that's how it is before you dilute it. Dilute it properly, and it's sort of like sugar for the plants. It's not as nutritious. There's not a lot of micronutrients, etc. It's a boost. Some people like to spray it on and even foliar feed plants. I'm not using it anymore, or foliar feeds anymore, just because they don't have a balanced set of nutrition in them. And it's sort of like living off of sugar. You can probably do it for a while. It's not a great idea.
Yeah, I think that's way too high, especially for organic. If you're feeding it organic, I don't think I've ever seen a 55 organic numbers there.
They're often immediately usable. So it's a real rush, whereas organics have to break down to be properly utilized.
Okay, so this person bought a DA Juliet Rose, bare root from DA that did not have a good root system as the others I bought at that time. Do you think it'll ever make up for the weak root growth I received?
Did you say Juliet?
Juliet, yes.
I don't grow that myself. I have a Julia, that's why I was wondering. I don't know about that. David Austin provides a 5-year guarantee. And if it really is.
Yeah, they replaced it. It's, yeah. Well, actually, they did replace it, but they didn't want it back.
They didn't want it back. In other words, they still have the one that was weak.
Well, I guess they just gave the person a new one, but
the
old one back.
I don't know if it came last year, but last year they had that huge freeze in the Texas area, and some of the growing fields for David Austin had some pretty tough roses. And so I don't know if that was it. I can't diagnose really. It may come back. Some people have, and I've done this. Okay, you get one last chance, and I have an area in the back 40. What I do is I get a really big pot, maybe like a 15-gallon pot, fill it up with good soil, and for that I like, by the way, Lyngso veggie mix, which has a lot of sand in it. And I put the rose in there and give it one more chance. And if it decides it's not going to, I take the shovel and I shovel prune it, which is dig it out and throw it away. Compost.
Okay. Alrighty. So next question is about the best type of roses to withstand hot and dry climate.
Again, you can go on, I think it's UC Davis Sustainability Roses. You may need a little bit of searching, and they have information on some of the best ones for the Davis climate. Now, there are roses in Arizona. The largest known rose in the world is in Tucson, of all places. It's a Lady Banksia, or a white Lady Banks rose. And it's, I think, if I remember right, it's 8,000 square feet on a huge trellis. It's got a huge base. I don't know how long it's been there. But it's an example of something that's put in huge, deep roots. And it must have found an underground water source somewhere. And it survives. So, short answer, some of the deep-rooted older varieties are particularly good. You may look up the UC Davis information for more info.
Okay, alrighty. So last question here. I know you talked about watering roses and you said, deep water them once a week, and you gave a number of 5 gallons per week per plant.
I didn't say once a week, but deeply and infrequently. You average it out at about 5 gallons a week. But again, as you're establishing them, you have to water them a little more, but still deeply, so that the roots seek the water and get deeper and deeper with time.
So do watering conditions vary for different varieties of roses, or is there a minimum amount of water sort of to use for most?
Depends on the amount of leaf and size of the rose. It's less for a mini. It's less for a small floribunda. It's more for a very large shrub rose or climber. I've got some 30-year-old Sally Holmes. These in back of me are three years old. But the big ones, I keep top to about 7 feet high. The base is of the trunk is about this size, and over at in a rose garden in Oakland, I've seen where it looks like a trunk of a tree on a Sally Holmes rose. So those clearly require more. If it looks like it's not getting enough water, if it's wilting frequently, you're going to have to give it a little more or a little deeper. But you shouldn't have quick wilting ever. The middle of summertime, very warm, windy, dry, it transpires a lot. You might have to give it a little more.
And could you just talk a little bit about how the watering needs differ between the seasons, winter versus summer?
Sure. Right now, I'm slowly having to turn up my watering, and I hate it. I would have expected it to be nothing or very little at this point in the year. And that's what I do. I tend to give it just enough and change the amount of time so that it will go deep, and the interval between days so that it will space out. If I get rain, obviously I shut it off. But in the middle of summer, I go to 100% on the timer dial, and I've worked it out as being the right amount of time for the roses to not overwater. And by having mulch and such, I cut down the amount of water. So that's what I do. And you don't need much during the winter, obviously, if it's raining. We got by for months without anything after that big December rain in our area. And it was a I think that, I hope answers it.
Okay, we have one last question. I thought that was the last one, but here we go. So this is about pruning. Can you propagate roses from cuttings? They don't know how to graft. Any advice?
Sure. The last 3 years, I've propagated probably 500 roses. We give them away as raffle prizes and we're going to have some for sale at our rose show that I was mentioning May 1st. I was out today potting them up. I usually, when I do pruning, I take a bunch of the cuttings. The simple version is take several nodes or the bud eye or leaf areas, maybe 6-8 inches long. Cut off some. You don't have to worry about leaves because you're not trying to get much new growth. You're trying to get roots. You can dip it in rooting hormone or you can dip it in honey. Honey is antibacterial, antifungal. It sort of seals the bottom. You cut a little bit of extra scoring off the bottom, stick it in what I use is that wonder soil that I mentioned, or peat, or perlite, or anything that's sterile. Keep it moist and wait. In about 2 months, 3 months, you can pot it up and then pot it up. And in a year, you'll have, or maybe less than a year, you'll have a blooming rose. And I'm going to be selling some of those year-old roses that I've been growing on their own roots. Nice thing about that is, if you propagate the right roses that don't have virus, the cuttings won't have virus. They'll be the rose that you cut it off of. I do have more information on that, and actually a poster board that I don't normally do this time of year, but it shows how to propagate from cuttings. Some people only sell roses on their own roots. We just had a talk recently from one of the growers at Heirloom up in Portland, and they do thousands and thousands of these from cuttings and propagate with just a little tiny bit of material, and then sell them in pots with soil, and they ship it to you that way. It's a little more expensive, but boy, they get going in a hurry.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Stu. Do you have any closing remarks before we sign off here?
Sure. I just invite people to find out about them. They're not as hard as they might sound. They find roses in cemeteries. I recently helped prune the one in Redwood City. That's the Union Cemetery. And they don't get a lot of care. We helped clean them up. They look pretty good. They don't get a lot of water. They look pretty good. They have very deep roots. Try it. And if you feel like you don't want to prune carefully, try the David Austin hedge trimmer route. I use hedge trimmers and they can work. So give it a try. Contact the Rose Society or your local master gardeners, and good luck. Happy gardening.
Alrighty, well, thank you so much. Thanks everybody for attending, and thank you again, Stu. And this class will be available on our website under the community resources, probably in about a day or two. So look forward to that. If you missed anything from this talk, do email Stu or myself, and we'll get your questions answered. Alrighty, thanks again.